The room is quiet, but your body is not. One hand is resting on your chest, like it is trying to hold something in place. Your shoulders are down, your phone is face down, the lamp is low, and still there is a part of you that keeps listening for danger. Not for a sound, for a feeling, for that old internal alarm that used to wake up before your mind could explain anything. And then, one night, something strange happens. Nothing dramatic, no miracle, no sudden life event, no grand emotional release. You simply notice that you are alone, and your body does not panic the way it used to. That is not a small thing. For some people, being alone feels like punishment. For others, it feels like grief. For others, it feels like a room with no air, even if the window is open. And then there comes a point, sometimes after heartbreak, sometimes after exhaustion, sometimes after years of carrying too much, when the nervous system stops treating solitude like abandonment. It does not happen because you finally became stronger in the way people on the outside understand strength. It happens because something deeper in you has stopped arguing with reality. Your body has begun to believe what your mind could not fully trust before, that you can be with yourself and still be safe. That is a very different kind of safety, not the safety of being rescued, not the safety of being chosen, not the safety of being constantly contacted, constantly needed, constantly reassured. The safety of not having to perform for your own survival. The safety of putting the phone down and not feeling your heart rise to your throat. The safety of waking up and not reaching for proof. The safety of sitting in your own silence without immediately trying to fill it with a person, a message, a fantasy, or a future. And if that sounds simple, it is because words make it sound simple. But the body knows how much work it took to get here. Maybe you used to confuse intensity with love. Maybe you used to confuse being wanted with being safe. Maybe you used to confuse attention with attachment and attachment with truth. Maybe your nervous system learned very early that closeness was unpredictable, that love could change shape without warning, that one day you were held in someone's attention and the next day you were left to interpret silence like a detective in the dark. So your body adapted. It became alert. It became fast. It became good at reading tone, timing, distance, delay, mood, withdrawal, and the smallest shift in energy. That kind of sensitivity can look like intuition from the outside. Sometimes it is, but sometimes it is not intuition at all. Sometimes it is vigilance wearing the mask of intuition, and the nervous system cannot tell the difference at first. It only knows patterns. It only knows what happened before. It only knows the old corridor, the old fear, the old expectation that if you relax, something will be taken from you. So you stay braced, you stay ready, you stay half listening even when nothing is happening. That is why solitude can feel so unbearable for some people. Not because they are weak, but because being alone leaves no one else to regulate the storm. When someone else is in the room, their presence can temporarily cover the alarm. Their voice can distract the body. Their texts can create a sense of motion. Their attention can become a kind of borrowed nervous system. But when the room is quiet, there is nowhere to hide from your own internal weather. And that is where the real work begins. Because the moment you stop outsourcing your safety, you begin to meet the part of yourself that has been waiting under all the noise. Carl Jung understood something essential about this. He saw that what we keep avoiding does not disappear. It waits. It lives in the unconscious, in the parts of us that were pushed aside, ignored, or organized into a role so we could survive. And when life becomes quiet enough, those parts do not necessarily arrive as thoughts. They arrive as tension, restlessness, exhaustion, panic, numbness, or a strange emptiness that no amount of distraction can solve. The body says what the mouth cannot yet say. I do not feel safe. I do not trust what happens when I let go. I do not know who I am when no one is watching me. I do not know how to exist without reaching. That is not a failure. That is a map. And the map usually points to a persona first. The persona is the face you learn to wear to meet the world. The version of you that knows how to be easy, useful, calm, attractive, agreeable, impressive, low maintenance, strong, understanding, or endlessly available. The persona is not fake in a simple sense. It is often a survival adaptation. It helped you belong. It helped you avoid conflict. It helped you keep connection alive when direct need did not feel safe. But the persona has a cost. When you live too long through the version of yourself that keeps everyone else comfortable, Your nervous system never gets to learn what it feels like to be safe when you are not performing. So even when you are alone, you may still be acting, smiling into the mirror, explaining yourself in your own head, rehearsing conversations that never happen, checking your phone as if your worth might be waiting there in a message bubble, feeling uneasy the moment there is no external demand on you. Because if nobody needs you right now, who are you? That question can feel terrifying. For some women, especially those who have spent years being emotionally useful, the answer was never supposed to be found in solitude. It was supposed to be found in being chosen, being needed, being the one who makes things easier, softer, warmer, more manageable. The nervous system can become so trained in relational vigilance that peace starts to feel suspicious. Silence starts to feel like the beginning of loss. Stillness starts to feel like abandonment. So of course being alone does not initially feel safe. It feels exposed. It feels like the mask has been removed and the room is watching. But here is the deeper truth. The room is not watching. The old fear is. And once you see that, the pattern begins to change. This is where a lot of people misunderstand healing. They think safety comes from finally finding the right person, the right relationship, the right reassurance, the right answer. But the nervous system does not become peaceful simply because life becomes ideal. It becomes peaceful when it no longer has to brace itself for every moment to turn into a threat. That means your body has to learn a new sentence. Not, nothing bad will ever happen. Not, I will never feel pain again. Not, I can control the future. The sentence is quieter than that. I can stay with myself while I do not know. I can breathe without chasing. I can feel discomfort without obeying it. I can be alone and still be held by my own presence. That last part is where the real shift begins, because there is a kind of holding that does not come from another person's arms. There is a kind of internal containment that develops when the ego stops panicking and the self begins to organize the inner world from a deeper place. Jung would call that movement toward individuation. That word can sound abstract, but in real life it looks like this. You stop abandoning yourself every time you feel an emotion that is inconvenient. You stop treating your own inner life like a problem to be managed by someone else. You stop making every feeling into a command. You stop believing that discomfort means danger. Individuation is not becoming isolated. It is becoming internally accompanied. There is a difference. A lonely person can be surrounded by people and still feel unsafe. A person in individuation can be physically alone and still feel steadier than they ever did in a crowded room. Because the center has moved. It is no longer out there in other people's moods, opinions, responses, or availability. It is no longer hanging on the edge of a message thread. It is no longer asking the outside world to certify your right to exist. The center is coming home. And that homecoming is often slow. It can begin with very small moments. You notice that you did not reach for your phone for 10 minutes. You notice that you ate without scrolling. You notice that you sat in the car after arriving somewhere and did not rush to fill the silence. You notice that the old urge to text, explain, check, fix, or soothe did not take over quite as fast. You notice that your chest still tightens, but not as violently. You notice that the ache is there, but it is not the same as danger. That is your nervous system learning new evidence, not through ideas, but through repetition. This is why solitude can become healing only when it is no longer a punishment. If you use being alone to disappear, to numb out, to prove something, or to withdraw in bitterness, the body does not experience safety. It experiences shutdown. But when solitude is used as a place to return to yourself, the body slowly learns that nothing is chasing it in the dark. And that learning is profound. Because many women have spent years in a state of emotional overfunctioning. They become the one who remembers, the one who checks in, the one who notices when everything is off, the one who keeps the relationship alive, the one who smooths the tension, the one who apologizes first, the one who can feel everyone else's discomfort before they can feel their own. This can look like love. It can even feel noble. But often, underneath it, there is a fear that if you stop managing the atmosphere, you will be left in it alone. So you manage, you anticipate, you adapt, you become indispensable. And then one day, the body gets tired. Not just tired in the ordinary sense. Tired in the soul sense, tired of scanning, tired of explaining, tired of earning, tired of making yourself smaller so others can feel bigger, Tired of being the emotional bridge for people who will never cross toward you with the same care. That tiredness is not laziness. It is a boundary trying to be born. And often, the first form that boundary takes is silence. Not the silence of punishment, not the silence of strategy, the silence of not reaching for what drains you, the silence of no longer trying to prove your worth in a conversation where your dignity keeps getting chipped away, the silence of letting the phone remain silent without turning it into a verdict. And here is where the nervous system starts to change, because it finally gets to experience a new truth. Nothing terrible happens when you stop performing availability. At first, that can feel unbearable. You may even feel guilty. That guilt is important. It often means the old pattern is losing its grip. Guilt appears when a role begins to dissolve. If you have been the one who always keeps things together, then stepping back can feel selfish. If you have been the one who always responds, then not responding can feel cruel. If you have been the one who always explains, then saying less can feel like betrayal. But guilt is not always a moral signal. Sometimes, it is simply the nervous system protesting the loss of an old identity. That identity may have been built around being needed, and if being needed has been your proof of safety, then being alone can feel like erasure. But you are not disappearing. You are becoming less available to the parts of life that required you to abandon yourself. That is a very different motion, and this is where the shadow enters. The shadow is not just the dark side in the dramatic sense. It is everything you had to push away to remain acceptable. It is the anger you were not allowed to feel, the need you were told was too much, the exhaustion you kept hiding, the resentment that grew quietly under all the kindness, the part of you that wanted to say, enough, the part of you that wanted to stop being the emotional furniture in everyone else's life. If that shadow has been ignored for too long, it can make you feel restless when you are alone. Because alone time means there is no one to project the discomfort onto, no one to blame, no one to rescue, no one to organize your feelings around. Suddenly the shadow is not being distracted by the outside world, and it starts speaking louder. Sometimes it speaks as sadness, sometimes as anger, sometimes as a strange urge to run back into the same old chaos, just so you do not have to feel the stillness. This is why some people say they want peace, but when peace arrives, they do not recognize it. Their body has become addicted to alertness, not because alertness is good, but because it is familiar. Familiar pain can feel safer than unfamiliar calm. That is one of the cruelest tricks of the nervous system. It can mistake predictability for safety, even when the predictable thing is misery. So a woman may leave a draining dynamic and then feel strangely panicked in her own quiet room. Not because she made the wrong choice, but because her body is no longer being fed the old chaos it knew how to survive. This is where patience matters. You do not force the body to trust, you teach it. You teach it by keeping promises to yourself that are small enough to be believable. You teach it by eating when you are hungry. You teach it by sleeping when you are tired. You teach it by not reopening conversations that only wound you deeper. You teach it by noticing the urge to reach and letting the urge pass without obeying it. You teach it by sitting with the discomfort long enough for it to lose its authority. And slowly, very slowly, the nervous system starts to understand. Alone does not always mean unsafe. Silence does not always mean abandonment. Stillness does not always mean loss. Sometimes it means your system is finally no longer under siege. That is when the body begins to soften in places that used to stay clenched. The jaw, the stomach, the throat, the space between the shoulder blades. And when the body softens, something else becomes possible. You can feel your own presence without needing to escape it. That is a deeper form of intimacy than many people ever experience with another human being. Because it is one thing to be loved by someone else. It is another thing to stop being at war with your own company. A woman who can sit in a quiet room and not immediately reach for distraction is a woman whose nervous system is beginning to trust her own keeping. Not because her life is perfect, not because she no longer hurts, not because no one can ever disappoint her again, but because she is no longer treating every moment of aloneness like a threat to her survival. And that changes everything. It changes how she enters relationships. It changes what she tolerates. It changes what she confuses with chemistry. It changes how quickly she abandons herself to keep someone else close. It changes the way she listens to her own body when it says no. This is why so many people only realize how unsafe they felt in connection once they have tasted real solitude. Not lonely solitude, clear solitude. The kind where the room is empty, but your nervous system is no longer begging to be rescued from it. And once that happens, old dynamics lose some of their power. The person you used to chase no longer has the same gravitational pull. The silence that used to terrify you begins to reveal what it was made of. The anxious need to be chosen starts to look less like love and more like a wound asking to be fed. That does not mean you become cold. It means you become more accurate. You stop calling every ache a sign. You stop calling every distance a mystery. You stop calling every familiar ache connection. You begin to notice the difference between longing and lack, between love and proving, between companionship and dependency, between a healthy bond and a nervous system that cannot yet rest. And this is where Carl Jung becomes especially relevant, because he would not ask you to shame the part of yourself that once clung. He would ask you to understand it, to see what inner image it was attached to notice where projection was operating, to recognize that sometimes what we think we are longing for in another person is actually a lost part of ourselves we have not yet learned to hold. That is a painful realization, because it means the person you were waiting for may have been carrying more symbolic weight than they could ever actually bear. They were not only a person, they were a container for your hope, your fear, your longing to feel safe, your wish to be enough, your fantasy that if they stayed, the old wound would finally close. That is projection. And once projection begins to dissolve, reality becomes clearer. Sometimes clearer is painful, but clearer is also kinder. Because reality does not require fantasy to survive. A real bond can stand in daylight. A real connection does not need you to shrink. A real love does not require you to remain anxious to prove it exists. And if you are not in that kind of connection, your body will eventually know. It may know before your mind admits it. It may know through exhaustion, through dread, through the relief you feel when someone cancels, through the strange calm that arrives when you stop expecting a text, through the way your breathing changes when you are finally alone and not waiting for the next emotional hit. That calm can be the beginning of wisdom, not because it tells you everything is solved, but because it tells you the body is no longer willing to lie for the sake of attachment. That matters. If this names something you have never been able to say out loud, write a single sentence for yourself in the comments. Just one honest sentence. Let it be simple. Let it be yours. Because there is a moment in this process when silence stops being emptiness and starts becoming space. Space to hear what you actually feel. Space to notice how often you mistook anxiety for intuition. Space to realize that your body was not asking for a person as much as it was asking for relief. And relief is not always found in another human being. Sometimes relief is found in no longer arguing with the truth that the old pattern exhausted you, the truth that your body has been carrying fear in places no one could see, the truth that you learned to survive by staying alert, the truth that you can now begin to live without constant alarm. That does not mean the nervous system will never flare again. It will. Healing is not a straight line, and safety is not a permanent mood. Some days the old reflex will return. Some nights the silence will feel heavier. Some mornings you will wake up and feel the old urge to reach before you even know why. That is okay. The goal is not to become someone who never feels fear. The goal is to become someone who no longer mistakes fear for prophecy. When the alarm goes off now, you can ask a gentler question. What is actually happening right now? What is memory? What is old pain? What is real? What do I need in this moment that does not cost me my dignity? That question alone can change the shape of a day, because it interrupts the automatic spiral. It brings the ego back into relationship with the body, instead of letting panic run the whole room. It opens a door to the self, that deeper center in you that does not need constant proof to remain steady. And from that place, being alone is no longer a verdict. It becomes a field. A field where your body can finally learn that no one is coming to rescue you from yourself, and that this is not a tragedy, it is a liberation. You do not have to keep waiting at the phone like your life is somewhere inside a notification. You do not have to keep translating silence into rejection. You do not have to keep making your nervous system available to every unstable signal in the room. You can sit down. You can breathe. You can let the quiet remain quiet. And if your chest still tightens, you do not need to panic about that either. You only need to stay present long enough for your body to discover that nothing in this moment is chasing it. That is how trust grows. Not in one dramatic breakthrough, in small, repeated acts of staying. Staying with your breath, staying with your body, staying with your own company, staying with the truth long enough for it to feel less foreign. There is a kind of dignity that appears when a woman stops begging her own nervous system to live in permanent emergency. She becomes less available to drama, less hypnotized by inconsistency, less impressed by emotional unpredictability, less willing to call chaos a connection, and more able to feel the quiet things that were always there. The chair under her, the air in the room, the steady pulse in her wrists, the fact that she is here, now, and not lost. That is not a small victory. That is the return of inner authority. So if tonight you are alone and the old fear rises, do not shame yourself for it. Do not tell yourself you are behind. Do not tell yourself you should be over it by now. The nervous system does not respond to humiliation. It responds to evidence, repetition, and safety that is finally consistent enough to believe. And maybe that is the real reason this moment matters so much. Because your body is learning that alone does not mean unworthy. Alone does not mean forgotten. Alone does not mean unsafe. Sometimes alone is the first place where you can finally hear your own life again. The phone can stay silent. The room can stay still. The night can unfold without demanding anything from you. And in that quiet, something in you begins to soften. Not because the world has become perfect, but because you have stopped leaving yourself every time the world became uncertain. My silence is not a game. It is my return to myself. Let that be enough for tonight. Let the room be a room. Let the body settle. Let the old alarm pass through without becoming your identity. Let the quiet prove, little by little, that you can remain with yourself and still be safe.